Welcome to the FPA podcast. I'm your host, Marney Reid, and today we're diving into one of the most important and probably extraordinarily overwhelming parts of getting your practice going and starting to make money and crawling out of debt, and that's really getting your financial foundation in place. We're joined by financial planner Will Walker, CFP, ChFC from United Capital Financial Advisors, and orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Elizabeth Lieberman, to break down what early career surgeons need to know about debt, investing, and really building that smart financial waterfall. So thanks for joining us, you two, and let's jump in. Lizzie, I'd love for you to share what you wish you had known for your first few years of practice. So if you could jump in a time machine, go back to wrapping up fellowship, knowing what you know now, what do you wish you had done?
I really wish that I had known anything. I kind of have to admit that I came out of training with very little financial literacy. So I wish that I had started thinking about long-term investment, savings, and planning for the future, but also that I had a little more insight into the lability of practicing medicine. So my background is I took a job. I thought, I think we all think this is going to be my forever job. But after 2 years, things changed and I ended up finding something that was a different fit for me. And it definitely kind of rocked the boat with my finances doing that. So, really, just one of the things that I wish that I had considered was that yourself, your practice, or just healthcare can change a lot. And so, you want to be prepared for anything and be flexible. I think there's also a lot of pressure to feel like you need to come out and know everything. So probably that was a little why I put my head in my sand and didn't learn a lot. It's like you either have to go get a business degree in order to learn this or just ignore it. So I think just starting to bit by bit learn would have been a better approach starting out early on.
That makes sense, but the hard thing is, hindsight is always 2020, and we never really know what we didn't know until we've hopefully not made too many mistakes learning it.
Yeah, exactly.
Will, if you had a child that was a physician just starting out in practice, knowing what you know about advising a multitude of surgeons around the country and the different variables, not only what they're facing with debt, with potentially having a significant other that may or may not be a bread earner, some of them having, small families, some of them helping out other family members, but then also the upside of their earning potential, what would you advise them on how to start? And how to really start building that wealth while also maybe getting out of debt?
Marty, it's a great question. And I think I would start with two things. And, the first would be, I would say, breathe, because you have a lot going on. You have a lot of decisions to make, and taking a step back and just, gathering yourself would be ideal if it were my child starting out. And the second thing would be, I would say don't compare yourself to everybody else. Your priorities, your needs are going to be different than maybe your colleagues. I think that sometimes they look and they go, well, they got a BMW, I got to get a BMW. And that happens anywhere, but I think it happens. And I don't think you should do that. I think you should kind of look at it and go, well, this is what my priority is. And if you have a spouse, your spouse's priority, this is what we want to do, and focus there. Don't get, overwhelmed or anything, or, just kind of focus on those priorities first.
Yeah, especially because it's all about the Audi. Not that I'm paid by Audi, but I wouldn't mind being. Lizzie, can you paint a little bit of picture? And you have what sadly is not necessarily a unique experience. You started off with a job, you thought this is going to be me, and then you changed. So can you walk us through what kind of things you adjusted to? And then at what point did you enlist help from, a trained professional, so to speak?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest adjustments is that you get to make choices now, not just in your practice, but you get to make choices on what you're spending your money on. I think a lot of our training, it's kind of like you go to college and there's a choice of maybe a dorm or apartment, but you're not looking to buy a house. You go to medical school and you get to choose a specialty, but it's a pretty clearly laid path. And now you have to really start making choices and prioritize where you're spending your time, your money, and your energy. So that's one of the biggest things I think starting out that was different. So early on, thinking about what your priorities are. Is it buying a house, upgrading your car, paying off your loans, those type of things? I think once you have the priorities, then you can figure out how much you want to spend on various things. My sort of story is I got married shortly after finishing fellowship and then bought a house not long after that. So that was really what we were prioritizing at the time, was sort of just like finding a permanent place to land, and had to reevaluate after a couple of months and say, okay, now what's left? And early on, probably not a whole lot. There's an urge to want to pay off loans really quickly, but I think maybe that's not always the best or smartest decision. There's different like repayment plans that you can look into. So I think, as Will said, everybody's going to be in a different situation. So just taking the time to set your priorities and then be ready to frequently reevaluate your situation, I think is probably the best thing that helped me starting out.
That makes sense. Will, in another podcast with one of Lizzie's colleagues, we talked about misconceptions and challenges that surgeons have about just financial planning in general, specifically to that surgeon in the 1 to 3 years in practice. They're trying to figure it out. Maybe they change jobs, they're in debt, they're trying to prioritize all of these different things. What kind of misconceptions are you seeing in, especially specific to orthopedics, since that's the majority of our audience?
No, yeah, this is a great question because there are some things out there that you would see, and I think the one is that always sticks out to me is the overcommitting to everything that comes your way, right? Like again, you want to really look at it and you want to do the right things, and you're trying to do the right things, and you're trying to start your career, but then when it comes to the financial side, I think overcommitting too early. I love Lizzie's story there, where they had their priorities. She got married, they bought a house. I mean, I hope she doesn't take it the wrong way, and Lizzie, don't take this the wrong way, but that's simple, and that's kind of what a lot of people want right there. Is like, we want to get married, we want to buy a house. Great. Let's start there. I mean, again, don't overcommit. House, car, or if you've been married, maybe you have kids, you start looking at schools and you look at all these things, 529 plans, retirement, all this, and it can be very overwhelming. So I think that building a strong foundation will help you. That way you can build on top of it. And one of the other things that, and we've already mentioned it a couple of times with the debts, and again, Lizzie just mentioned it, but paying off your loans before investing. I mean, again, investing, you're taking advantage of compound interest, and loans are just math. So, I mean, I would say all the surgeons that I talk to, they're very smart people, probably much smarter than me. So, if you show them and educate them, I think they realize that they can find a balance there.
That makes sense for sure. Well, let's stick with Will just for now, and let's talk about this whole concept of a financial waterfall. Can you break down what that means and why it could be such a powerful tool for these early career surgeons?
No, I mean, again, I was thinking about this, and when you talk about a financial waterfall, I think it's prioritizing what you want to spend your money on, where your cash flow goes. That's the way I look at it. And really, it goes back to finding what is important to you and what your priorities are going to be, and then get organized and see what you actually have coming in, what you definitely have to have going out to live your lifestyle, and then starting to prioritize those other things that you want to do, whether it's paying down your loans, is it investing, is it building up an emergency savings, is it getting extra insurance, whatever that may be. I believe that the surgeons that I talk to, and that you guys are, that are listening here, you're probably in a very good financial position from how much you're earning, right? So it's like, can I get organized, and can I decide what are going to be my priorities, and then start just putting the money towards it, whether it's automatic or however you want to do it. Automatic's usually really good, and that usually really works. But I think that keeps you on track. Again, we want to prevent that, as we've all heard, it's called lifestyle creep. We really want to prevent that. And I think if you're prioritizing where your money is going, I think that can offset that, and you can stay ahead of that.
Lizzie, you're not the first surgeon that I've heard talk about how those loans are just this dark cloud looming over you. And I've heard surgeons, share with immense pride how quickly they've been able to pay off. Is there ever any consideration of, when you look at the interest rates that they're carrying, you look at what the market is returning, have any of you ever sat down and said, why don't we reach out to some of our other friends who maybe have wealth advisors, portfolio managers, and see what per year those are returning, and do kind of a comparison and analysis on, do we pay off the loans? Do we have a balance? What's going through your head, if any of that?
Yeah, that's great. point, Marnie. I think investment rates for loans can be quite good, and sometimes you can even defer loans. And so sometimes it makes more sense to start investing where you're going to see a bigger return than you will see the loss from your loans, potentially accruing more debt there. So this is where I started meeting with a financial advisor and really strategizing about what is the best rate at which to pay off loans versus invest as you start earning a little bit of money. And again, this is a place where I'd say, expect the unexpected. I switched from a sort of employed position to a private job. And with a lot of private practices, there may be an option to buy in early or a little bit later as you get 2 or 3 years in. And that may mean that you're having to take out yet another loan. So just all of these things are going to play a part in how you're sort of managing things. And I think for us as busy surgeons, often that's when it's helpful to enlist some outside perspective and help.
What was the point in your career, Lizzie, where you said, fellowship trained, extraordinary hip and knee surgeon, I could figure this out on my own, but you know what? I just don't want to, or maybe someone else can do it slightly better than me. Where was that point?
Towards the end of residency, I was lucky that we had somebody come give a talk about things like disability insurance, and that happened to be a financial advisor. And that just kind of helped me realize that I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't even know it would be important to start, purchasing things like additional disability insurance. I just sort of thought that that was taken care of, but these are things that you need to start looking into. So having somebody who I met through residency meant that this was a person who knows doctors, specifically orthopedic surgeons, my specific situation, leaving residency, going on to fellowship. And, he's still the person who, I work most closely with in terms of getting advice about all things financial. But towards the end of residency is the first time I started paying attention. And then it gets even more complicated. My husband's not in medicine. And so he has his whole own income and other things that we need to think about there. So as you start adding other people in the mix, then it becomes a whole different story too.
You are way ahead of the game. A lot of the surgeons I talk to, they wait until they're completely out of debt. They're starting to see, the checking account hopefully pile up a little bit, and that's when they start. And I'll be honest, I thought I was pretty savvy because my dad made an appointment the first month that I got my first full-time job, and we sat down with, a portfolio manager and we got started there. But I look back on some of the decisions and I go, what an idiot. Why did I do that? Why didn't I consult someone beforehand? So, Will, you work, to Lizzie's point she just made, you are subspecialized. I'm sure you work with a ton of different individuals, but you really truly understand orthopedic surgeons and I'm sure other subspecialties. There's a very unique earning potential for that orthopedic surgeon out there. So, if they're overwhelmed, they've got small kids, they've got debt, they call you up and they say, Will, I heard you on this podcast. I want to talk to you about a few things. What kind of questions are you going to sit down and ask them and their spouse that they need to start preparing for so that when they come to you for that introductory call, it can, be of benefit?
That is an excellent question. Yeah, I would say the first thing that they would want to do is, I say this often, is get organized. Like figure out what you have. Having the scattered assets all over the place, if that's the case, that can be sometimes, it can be overwhelming. It really can. And it can get kind of frustrating when you're like, oh, wow, I have this account. Wait, I have this account. What's this over here? And then, as Lizzie just said, then when she was in residency, then she got married, and then there's a whole nother, person coming in, her husband, who, boom, now you got two different, we'll say two banks merging, right? They're coming together and you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? So I would say that the first thing is to get organized and then start to figure out what's important to you. What do you value? A lot of times we're asking questions, just trying to figure that out. Sometimes it has nothing to do with money, but, having that conversation and figuring out what do we value, what's going to be important to us, and then trying to figure out what the actual goals are going to be is something that you would want to know before you come in front of us. I mean, you got to have some type of goal, or you're probably not coming to like a wealth manager or financial advisor.
Absolutely makes sense. And I would assume that there's a decent amount of estate planning done in that, right? I mean, in all transparency, I'm a daughter of a retired specialized estate planning attorney, but everything, from when I was little was all about planning for, when you are no longer walking this earth.
Yes, yes. Again, there's estate planning is something that I think is overlooked a lot of times. Some people would say it's funny that, well, I don't have an estate. Well, if you own any type of property, you have an estate. You may not believe that, but that is the case. You do have an estate, and estate planning, getting your wills done, things like that, getting that stuff in order, extremely important. That's one of the 6 areas of financial planning you're probably going to look at if you're working with a financial advisor. But that is very important. It is a lot overlooked sometimes, Marty.
Lizzie, knowing what you know now and really jumping in early in residency, if you could go back in time and fine tune a few things, what do you feel like you would have done earlier?
I actually think I would have more conversations with people about money and financial things. And, that's people in your own practice who, like I said, joining a private practice, having a conversation very early on. How did you get a loan to buy into the practice? What bank did you go through? In having some conversations, you'll learn about, oh, there's different loans that you can get that are called doctor loans that help when you're looking to buy your first house. Do those exist? What bank do you go to? How did your realtor navigate that? So just talking to people along the way. As I've kind of grown in my practice, now I do work going to national conferences, doing some consulting things. And so talking with people, it's really helpful to get advice on like, who do you go to look at some of your contracts, finding a good lawyer. Who do you go to if you need to talk about asset protection and starting an LLC or something? Like, where is the money going? So, heaven forbid, if you get sued or something, where, if you have sort of different things that you're working on, potentially those things go into different places. So some of them are protected. Anyways, I think the more that you talk to people about this kind of stuff, we can share resources. And that's been incredibly helpful and something that's made it a lot easier to make smart decisions, I think, and not try and reinvent the wheel.
I love that. And it's so funny, Lizzie, when you and I started off in this healthcare track, if you brought up money, it was like, oh, that's a faux pas, especially, when the doctor brought it up. And what's been really cool to see is, with Will's extraordinary partnership, we at our national FPA program started what is one of the most popular breakout sessions, and that's the financial skills lab that we run where Will and we have a person with a PhD in finance who runs one of the world's largest nonprofits that, really give a lot of advice. So it's been cool to see. So, Will, we've seen this thread come up, over and over again. Lizzie talked about it too, right out of fellowship. She's getting married. She's, looking to buy a house and, set up roots and everything. Surgeons always have a lot of different priorities that are looking, to take the money. How do you help people navigate the competing priorities when they're starting off?
Yeah, the competing priorities. That's interesting. Again, it really is. Everybody's different, right? Like that, everybody has different ways they want to go. And I think it's finding a balance. I think, like we said about the loans, it is finding a balance to make sure that your each priority is being addressed. Sometimes, there's one or two that are very high on the list, right? And I think it's making sure that each they're being addressed, but I think it's monitoring it, making sure that you continue to move through and hit the other priorities they want. That's sometimes something that we see, that you're kind of moving through and you get off track, or you just stop tracking it, stop monitoring things. And I think that could make it a little bit tough, because it can be frustrating because you're doing so well, and then all of a sudden, like, you lose track, you stop monitoring it, and then a couple of years go by, and then you're again, you're almost back to square one, and you got to almost start over again. So I think it's making sure that you keep a balance, but then also, track it, monitor it, make sure that you really look at it and evaluate what kind of trade-offs you have to make to continue to progress.
Well, and to Lizzie's point, as you evolve as a surgeon, many of you out there will start, consulting for companies or get involved in different, investment opportunities and stuff. And just like you and your team, hopefully, sit down and you do a huddle, at the start of a week. Unfortunately, orthopedics still has a really high burnout rate. Do you feel like if physicians, especially physicians with a lot of, monetary obligations, and if their partner doesn't work, do you feel like a stable, solid financial plan and a partner to help with this could help reduce with some of that burnout, even if it's just the anxiety of, shoot, what happens if something happens to me?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, we're hit from every direction. And, I think the idea that doctors make a ton of money, it's not like anybody's going into medicine these days. So, some people get lucky and can find other really good investments or enjoy investing in real estate or other things that maybe can earn a little bit more income. But I think we have to settle in with the fact that a career in medicine isn't going to make us billionaires, and it can be frustrating and lead to burnout when you're trying to keep up with people in your community who potentially have like greater earning potential. We're somewhat capped. But what I think helps, make that more digestible is knowing that you have a pretty secure, stable job and a future. And if you plan well and make smart investments, then you can end up with a very comfortable retirement. I mean, that's sort of what I look at is how am I doing this year? In 5 years, what are my goals and priorities for travel or big purchases or house remodel or whatever? And then as it gets further on, it's okay to start looking at how many years until I can retire. And when I do retire, what is each year going to look at if the trajectory of what I'm earning now carries on in the future in this direction and with the investments I've made, et cetera. So, but that takes a plan, and I haven't planned that on my own. I've gotten a lot of advice, and early on I mentioned there's a lot of flexibility with that plan, but that just gives me sort of security to know that there is a plan in place and set realistic expectations for what the next few years and beyond are going to look like.
I love that. I'm not a surgeon, but I am a consultant, so 1099, which many of you private practice are. And, on a quarterly or every 6 month basis, I sit down with my team and I talk about what I think is coming in, and we look at tax, considerations and strategies. So, Will, for the listeners out there that are in that transition phase, right? So we first talked about that early career, super in debt, a lot of competing priorities for the money that's coming in. Let's say that, you're now facing a surgeon that's more in the Elizabeth era where, she's starting to do consulting, she's starting to, get opportunities to invest. What considerations from an investment and tax planning perspective do you have for those surgeons that are suddenly going to find themselves with a lot more income that are coming towards them?
I mean, again, I think it comes down to, again, going back to their priorities. Like, what do they want to see happen? I mean, again, I think when you have all that, the extra income and all coming in, I think that, finding ways to minimize your taxes is definitely something that's always going to be top of mind. I look at taxes as like it's probably a bad analogy, but I use it anyway. It's like a boxing match. Like if your taxes you're going 15 rounds, you're going 12 rounds, and every little body shot adds up later on. So every little thing you can do to minimize those taxes when you have the extra income, when you're putting it away, whether it's an investment strategy that's got some tax loss harvesting or something in there, or something along those lines, using ETFs versus mutual funds, things like that. I think every little thing you can do does add up over time. And I think it's just making sure that, your priorities are, aligned, and then, starting with that extra income, putting it somewhere that, you feel comfortable with. The other side of that, just kind of adding on, is hear a lot comes up a lot, like talking about like going into real estate and rental properties and things like that. I think that's great. I think that will definitely help you with taxes. There are trade-offs with that, right? There are a lot of trade-offs there that you'd have to take into consideration when you have somebody that's renting a property of yours. So I think that, but it does help you, would help you for taxes. So any decision you're going to make when you're looking at different investments, there's going to be trade-offs there that you have to evaluate.
Makes sense. And Lizzie, for our audience listening out there that are, maybe a little bit more junior than you, what top advice do you give them, especially if they're just so overwhelmed with everything else that life and practice is throwing at them?
Yeah, you don't have to know everything all at once, I think is the best advice. And there's really smart people out there that your colleagues are probably working with. So it's okay to talk about money. We all should be talking about money. It's the responsible thing to do. So that'd be my biggest piece of advice is think about it, talk about it, and sort of plan for your future starting now, knowing that you have a long career ahead of you and you're going to make some good decisions and probably make some mistakes and bad decisions. But I think as long as you're not doing these things in isolation or alone, then you'll probably end up on top at the end of the day.
And sometimes the best lessons we learned are from those mistakes. So there's that too. Well, thank you both for joining us today. This was an incredible discussion, and hopefully the audience out there really can start beginning, their financial planning journey. If you'd like to schedule a call with Will to really go over any of the items we discussed, or just to talk about, how do they even start prioritizing and based on their options, please email him at will, W-I-L-L, Walker, W-A-L-K-E-R, at unitedcapitalwealth.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of the FPA podcast. The opinions expressed in this podcast are Will Walker's and do not represent the opinions of his employer, United Capital. The commentary contained herein is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. You should obtain your own tax, legal, or investment advice based on your circumstances. The material is based on sources deemed reliable but is not guaranteed.